If you're the one doing the disengaging, you have no clue. But those who are around you are learning a whole lot about you because you are disengaged.
A handful of people that in our lives, no matter what area of our life, that we've had to tiptoe around. When you're tiptoeing, there's no psychological safety. Mm-hmm. You're waiting for the hammer to drop. You're waiting for the next outburst. You're waiting for something to happen, and you don't want to be the tipping point. Hi there. Welcome back to Unapologetic Rabble Rousers. I'm DocShellie.
And I'm Carla Lewis. And we are going to take a stroll down psychological safety lane.
It's like we're going down memory lane here.
Actually, probably.
Sort of a little bit.
We might actually trigger some of those. So trigger warning. There may be some things that come out as we pursue this really very serious, compelling topic. And it's really going to be an exploration of what do we mean by what is meant by psychological safety. Because it has a place everywhere, in every relationship, be it a professional, work-related thing, team-related thing, family, friends. Psychological safety is almost like the air we breathe.
Right.
It's pervasive, and it's really hard to exist comfortably if you don't have it. So we're going to talk about what it is and the implications of it in our lives, and ending up with how do we develop it, how do we nurture it, how do we sustain it going forward.
Excellent.
So let's talk about what is it?
What it is. There's a lot of formal definitions of psychological safety, but when I think about it, it's, as a leader, it's about creating a space where people can show up authentically. They can ask their questions without judgment or fear of retaliation. And as a human being wanting psychological safety, it's having that feeling that I can challenge your assumptions, your beliefs in a respectful way, and we can engage in a conversation. It's about being able to feel connected and belonging to other people, with other people. It's about being able to just show up without fear of, oh, they're going to think I'm weird, or they're going to think I'm too smart, or they're going to think I'm dumb, or there's going to be some retaliation for saying something, versus just being able to accept people.
And I think the psychological safety really, it does come into play when two or more are gathered in a relationship.
Absolutely.
Even in the moment. We have talked a lot leading up to this about elements that facilitate being true to self and those around you. And I'm not going to go through the list of those, but we have to reflect on how each of them contributes to the degree of psychological safety that we can enjoy, or that we have as being threatened because we don't have the mutual respect and we haven't been leaning in, or we haven't calibrated expectations, and people are failing us and they didn't even know. We talked about boundaries and being aware of them and managing them. So I guess I did just do a little bit of a rundown of the things that we've covered, but all of that plays in.
Yeah, and people's actions, that saying, people show you who they are, believe them. Their actions around psychological safety really are telling. I think back, I've shared the story in a previous podcast episode where I was having a one-on-one with a leader who couldn't get out of her phone. I'm not feeling real safe in that moment to continue talking. And so I had asked a question and paused for her to respond. And she said, "You can keep going. I'm listening." And I said, "I was waiting for you to answer my question." And she had no idea what my question was. So it was like, then why are we having this conversation? You clearly do not have time. You have no interest. And so that impacts psychological safety. So the next time you go to have a conversation with someone like that, you're like, do I matter? Why are we having this conversation? Because clearly you do not care. You don't want to know what I have to say. And so when people are disinterested, it can create a space where someone's not feeling psychologically safe to engage in conversation.
I want to take a little swing at that, not a swing at it, but I want to help nudge it along, because I just had this memory of a workplace situation, and I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts, where a request was made by the senior leader that people not be looking at their phones or their laptops or whatever during a meeting. And I ask you, when you're sitting in a meeting and you are seeing people around you, maybe they don't look distracted, but they sure as heck aren't just focused on the meeting, how does it feel that there's value in even just having that meeting? And being able to speak up and have it matter when you've got people that are surfing, doing whatever. I sat next to a guy in a meeting one time, and he was one of the leads on this project that was a little bit in trouble. I sat next to him. He was buying a trumpet on eBay while we were having this very important discussion about some things we were going to have to fix.
The trumpet was more important to him.
Certainly the meeting was not. The topic was not. So I had to bring that in because those things where we can see that we are not we're not getting the full engagement from somebody. If you're the one doing the disengaging, you have no clue. But those who are around you are learning a whole lot about you because you are disengaged. Oh, I did that with another leader. We were giving a trip report about something, and there were some action steps to this. We started, and this person was across the table and was busy doing some email. And I said, one of our folks had already begun the presentation, and I reached out and touched their arm. And I said, just a minute. We can come back another time when it will be convenient for you to engage with us. She said, I'm listening. I said, but you're not engaged. And she looked at me, and she took her laptop and put it down and smiled and said, okay, I'm engaged now.
I'm ready to go now.
Okay, but you shouldn't have to ask for that. If you're being called to a meeting, if you're going out with people, you talked about it, a group of people out for dinner, and everybody's sitting around at the restaurant looking at their phones. So it doesn't have to be just in a professional setting. It's what? Come on. Okay, so it was a couple of memories there that just jumped out, had to come out.
But you think about when you're talking about the meetings and how many meetings we're called to. Little sidebar from psychological safety, but I often asked, what's my role in that meeting? Why do you need me there? Because meetings happen all day long, and 90% of them could have been an email, didn't need to happen, could have been a simple conversation, but instead we spent an hour and a half in a meeting. I detest meetings unless there's a real solid purpose and I know what my role is. And when I started asking people that, most of the time they said, oh, you don't need to be there. Cool, thanks. I won't be then.
I think it was Dave Barry said that if there was one thing that could be named as the source of the greatest waste of time, that would be meetings.
Yeah, also PowerPoints. There's a book called Weekend Language I remember reading years ago, and they rattled off statistics of things that people would rather do than sit through another PowerPoint presentation. And it was like, I would make up a number, but it was like a high percentage, like 80-some% would rather go to the dentist and have their teeth drilled.
Without Novocaine.
Yeah. And some of the things were very funny, what people would rather do than sit through another PowerPoint.
Death by PowerPoint.
And yeah, we still do PowerPoints all the time.
Yes. Okay. I'm thinking we might be having some other topics popping out of this. Like how not to have meetings and get stuff done.
Yeah. Back to psychological safety. We think about what we get from psychological safety when there's that environment where people feel safe, whether it's at work, it's at home, it's with your friends, your family, out on the pickleball court, where it creates a space for people to have conversation, to learn, to grow, to thrive. It's just a healthy environment for people. And then when we don't have it, sometimes you just get so used to people being a certain way that you don't even recognize that you don't have psychological safety with them. But when you don't have it, it can really temper creativity, your continuous improvements, your thought process, your conversation. It really impedes progress.
I think that recognizing what it means to have psychological safety and looking at what you might be able to observe as indicative of the fact that the safety factor has eroded, if it ever was there.
Mm-hmm.
We could go through some ideas around that, go through some examples of those kinds of things. What does it feel like? What does it mean when you have a particular element of psychological safety? And what does it look like when you don't?
Yeah, I think back over my career and some of the people I worked for where their egos were very fragile. And so you kind of had to tiptoe around them. And I'm sure many of us could rattle off a handful of people that in our lives, no matter what area of our life, that we've had to tiptoe around. When you're tiptoeing, there's no psychological safety. Mm-hmm. You're waiting for the hammer to drop. You're waiting for the next outburst. You're waiting for something to happen, and you don't want to be the tipping point. Not psychological safety.
No.
At all. Mm-mm. But I think of the few leaders that I worked for where you could say anything, you could challenge anything, and it would always lead to a greater outcome, better results, great conversations, and stronger relationships.
Have you been a part of that kind of a conversation where it just built, and the energy went higher and higher, and the product of that came so easily, the time flies by, and you come out of that exchange with something much greater than the sum of the parts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I used to work with this guy, and he was actually my boss, but we came from different aspects of quality when we were in manufacturing, and we argued all the time, but in a healthy way. It was just a lot of, well, no, you can't do it that way. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Well, let's figure it out. Let's combine the best of what I do and the best of what you do. And we would do this sometimes in meetings, and it would make other people very uncomfortable because people don't like conflict. But he and I were like, we'll charge in. And our vice president said, just sit back and watch the lemonade happen. She was like, they'll come out with a great solution and it'll blow your mind. But, there was a lot of fist pounding on tables. There was cursing, but never at each other. It was never like, you're an idiot because you don't do it my way. Mm-hmm. But it was just, but we were both very passionate and very heated about whatever we were trying to fix or resolve. But we listened to each other. We would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then all of a sudden one of us would go, I got it. And then we'd chart something out and just be like, nitpick a couple little things. And no one else would have ever come up with this.
You talk about it in terms of passionately about it. It's not passionate about beating you.
Right.
It's not passionate about winning in this discussion.
Exactly.
It's about being passionate about the topic. And there's nothing wrong with being able to say, no, that's not how, but because you're learning, you're listening, you're leaning in, your focus is on understanding to a greater good.
Exactly.
Oftentimes we watch these things devolve into a competition. Mm-hmm. And then we end up with this power struggle. And I don't even need to say more. I'm imagining there's a bunch of eyes rolling up saying, oh my God, remember so-and-so? And yes, I had to break up two gentlemen who were literally, we had conference tables, and they were standing up, their fists on the table, leaning across, like spitting in each other's faces. They were both yelling. They were both at the same time. Nobody was listening to anything. And I said, stop it. And I got up. I happened to be the project manager for this thing that they were arguing about, and they were two customers. Stop it. I picked up my books and I said, you guys call me when you're ready to be business people and adult about it. And I left the room. You shouldn't have to be subjected to that kind of activity, that kind of disrespect, that kind of silliness.
Yeah. I had a conversation one time it was a woman I worked for, and she and one of our clients were screaming at each other over the phone. Mm. And I happened to be in the meeting when it started, and I let it go for a minute, and I put the other person on mute, and I said, you ever speak like that when I'm in a room again, we're done. Like, I'm not going to tolerate that. It's unprofessional. It's rude. And you're never going to get resolved what we need to get resolved. And I walked out. And the next day she came up to me and she was like, I apologize for my behavior. She is just such a trigger for me. And I said, it doesn't matter what she triggers in you. It's up to you to manage your reputation, to manage how people see you. Because every person who just walked by this conference room saw you acting like a fool. So just don't do it around me anymore because there's no need for it. Right. I know this person is kind of a mess, but that's her problem. And we have to figure out how to work with it. I just set that stage of don't ever act like that again. Mm-hmm. It was embarrassing. And I don't want to be associated with that.
And at some point, your own consideration about psychological safety has to yield to being true to what are your values, to your integrity.
Yeah, and there's never going to be psychological safety between the two of them because they just all yell and scream at each other. That's hard to overcome. Mm-hmm. That's not something either one of them will ever forget. Every conversation, psychological safety is at risk. Always. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be.
You're not getting the best of both of those people.
Not at all.
You will never
You're
get
getting the
best.
worst.
Yes.
You're absolutely getting the worst of them.
And the rest are just kind of standing back and letting the fur fly.
Yeah. 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 Timothy Clark has a great book talking about psychological safety, and he talks about it from a kind of a continuum of 4 perspectives, where he talks about inclusion. You have to feel like you belong in order to have psychological safety. And then he talks about learner safety. Do you feel safe to ask questions? Do you feel safe to make mistakes and learn from them?
Okay.
And then contributor safety. Are you safe to contribute into the conversation? I'm very much dumbing this down, and then challenger safety was the ultimate goal of that's where the change makers are. That's where the disruptors live. And they really will not just challenge the status quo, they'll attack the status quo in a right way. But those are the change makers of the world. And so you think about it on that continuum, where you've been in your previous experiences with your friends, your family, at work. Where was your level of psychological safety? And so when I think about as a leader, it's absolutely my responsibility to create that environment for people where they feel included, where they feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel valued, where they can learn and grow. Because why else am I a leader if I'm not helping my people learn and grow? And can they contribute? Am I willing to listen to them? Am I willing to consider their ideas? And then that challenger perspective is, can we just really shake up what we're doing? And are you open to that as a leader? And then as an individual contributor or another person being a stakeholder of whatever product you're working on or service you're working on, are you comfortable doing all of those things? So it's an interesting place to think I'm creating it, recognizing when it's not happening, and being able to have conversation around it to make sure that everyone feels they can operate on that continuum of psychological safety.
First, I'd like to say that it didn't sound at all like you were dumbing it down.
Oh, if you read his book, you would.
No. Okay, so I appreciate it more as putting it in real language, okay? Because people who can't speak about it in those terms aren't able to help others understand it.
Yeah.
So thank you for not dumbing it down, but thank you for going through the translation.
Yeah.
Both people have to be in want and respectful of psychological safety. Mm-hmm. It could be all people, but all sides of the transaction, everybody has to be aware of and respectful of psychological safety. And it's all well and good if you, as a leader, are trying to impart that. On the other side, it creates an invitation. It's an invitation for people to be able to take a risk, to step out of their comfort zone. And there's some people that just don't want to do that. Thank you very much.
Right.
I am much more comfortable being uncomfortable and therefore not taking a risk. And I'm going to fight real, real hard to stay uncomfortable and not feeling like I can take a risk by adding an idea or questioning something, coming in as a challenger. Mm-hmm. So that's another interesting piece of the dynamic. And when you get back to this leader or family members understanding each other, leaders understanding their folks, you can only get a feel for that person's perspective on this by caring enough to go learn about it.
And I think that creating a psychologically safe space and being on the receiving end of that space, it takes some vulnerability, because sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. If I ask this question, are they gonna make fun of me? Are they gonna tease me? Are they gonna just be like, oh yeah, let me answer that question? Or is there some repercussion for it? So it takes a lot of vulnerability to take advantage of what could be a psychologically safe space, because you have to test it out.
Imagine if you're coming in from a different team. You're coming in from a different community. Mm-hmm. You don't know. What you do know is what you had. You don't know what you have. If you can come in with an idea that I'm either going to test it from a position of meek and mild, and I'm going to just sit back here quietly and observe and come to my own conclusions, or I'm going to step out boldly, being true to myself, asking the question, and seeing what happens.
Yeah, and I think an example of this just happened last night. I've been taking a class, and we were talking a little bit about identity. And a woman had shared that when she first moved from, I think it was the Dominican Republic, to the United States, she was shocked and dismayed that Americans put their elderly people in assisted living homes. She couldn't believe it, because they would never do that in the Dominican Republic. And she went on about it to the point where it almost felt like she was saying, you should be ashamed of yourself for having to put a parent, a relative, a grandparent into an assisted living home. And I have a friend right now who's going through this with her mom. And her mom is actually, I think, thriving at this assisted living place. She lived by herself. She had very little interaction with people. Mm-hmm. And now she has human connection. And she just seems lighter and happier. And my grandparents were in assisted living places. There was fine. They're social beings. That was a good way for them to be social. And this woman just went on and on and on about how it's her responsibility to take care of the elderly, and she can do that. And I thought, not everyone has that opportunity, but no one on the call was saying anything. And you know me, I can't help myself. And I said, thank you for sharing your perspective. I said, I feel like you're judging people who are having to put or choosing to put a parent, a relative, a grandparent into an assisted living facility. There's nothing wrong with it. In today's society, you have families that have 2 or 3 incomes to survive. They can't afford to keep a person in their home. Maybe they have to build an extension on their home. Maybe they can't do that. They have people coming in and out of their homes. There's no guarantee of any more safety in your own home than there is in an assisted living facility. Some people have to do that. Some people choose to do it, but you sound very judgy about it. And a couple people pinged me, thank you for saying something. Why didn't you say something?
Yeah.
And she repeated everything that she said, because she's trying to convince me that I am wrong and she is right. And I never tried to convince her that her way was right or wrong. I think it's great if you can do that. Mm-hmm. I love my parents, but hell no, they're not moving in with me. It's not going to happen. They're 87 and 85. So at some point, they may need to go to an assisted living place. They're fine right now. But it was just interesting to me that she had to repeat everything that she said because I didn't agree with her. Mm-hmm. And I said, I understand what you're saying, and I love that you're able to do that for your family. My point is not everyone can. And we're in a class about coaching. And so if you have a client who is coming to you with a problem about having a parent in an assisted living place, you need to check your bias. You need to check your belief system. It's okay that we think and believe differently, but can you leave space for the conversation and understanding?
We've even talked about that. You can't force your opinion on someone else. You can't expect them to pick it up. It's theirs to pick up or not.
And that impacts psychological safety. Because if all you're doing is trying to compel me to your point of view, I'm not going to feel safe to challenge that. I'm not going to feel safe to ask you a question that's contradictory to what you're telling me or just your belief. It's not going to happen.
No, I respect you have that opinion, and I'll appreciate your respect for the fact I have mine.
Yeah, but you can't get it because I don't respect you.
Yep. But that's a really good example, though. And we all get caught up in that.
And it shows up everywhere.
Yes.
In everything that we do. Yeah.
It's because we're passionate about what those beliefs are. Mm-hmm. It's getting back to that mutual respect that says, and listening, leaning in to understand, okay, you may not see it the same way I do. And it's not my job to convince you that you need to see it my way. I'm offering this because it's genuine and it's from me and it's because I care and I respect you. And you can take it or leave it because it's not going to change my life.
Right.
You do you. I'll do me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's just so much that goes into psychological safety. But it's so important to work on creating that. And I think about families with kids where a kid might be struggling with homework, but they don't feel safe asking a parent or a sibling for help because they're going to get made fun of. They're going to get teased. They're going to be judged. And I don't want to take the fun out of life.
I was going to say there's a side note on that, which is the people that are teaching the younger children math say, do not ask your parents for help on your math homework.
Yeah.
But anyway, just a side note.
2 and 2 no longer equals 4.
Yeah, something. I don't know.
But it's important if you have people that might be struggling with something, and if they don't feel safe having a conversation with you, they're going to continue to struggle, and who knows what that could turn into. And it's a very prolific thing to be able to create psychological safety for all people that are in your life.
You had an exquisite example of that in the story of the man and his teenage son and the gummy bears.
Yeah.
You'll find that episode 10 or 12 back from, but incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that psychological safety was a matter of life or death.
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really important. I think if we think about just wrapping this topic for this episode, that it's really important to understand that psychological safety, the benefits of it really create a ripple effect, and it impacts your home life, your work environment, wherever you are. Your health, yeah, everything. And by prioritizing it, we really create an environment where everyone can thrive. Everyone can thrive. It's not just about me. It's about the collective we. And if we have that psychological safety and we're able to create that environment and get that trust and respect, everyone wins. It's a win-win situation for everyone. And wouldn't that be a beautiful place to be?
It's worth the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm DocShellie.
And I'm Carla. Thank you. Till next time.
Because if all you're doing is trying to compel me to your point of view, I'm not going to feel safe to challenge that. I'm not going to feel safe to ask you a question that's contradictory to what you're telling me or just your belief. It's not going to happen.
No, I respect you have that opinion, and I'll appreciate your respect for the fact I have mine.